I have been on the Roswell case almost a quarter of a century, and in that time, I've gotten over 4,000 photographic images. I photograph everything because you never know what's here today and gone tomorrow. So every time I have to give a talk, I have to go through all 4,000 images, and unfortunately, they're all my favorites. And it really takes me a few days just to cull it down to get a talk that I can give in the allotted time. So, and I can also promise you that I never give the same talk twice. Never, every one is tailored to whomever I'm speaking to. So, without further ado, the first item is how does somebody who was born on Darien Street in North Philadelphia, was raised in Mayfair and Oxford Circle, graduated from Lincoln High School, how do they wind up in Roswell? Well, if anybody has an idea, let me know, because I'm open to suggestions. But I was interested in UFOs as a kid, as most of us were. And somewhere along the line, even when I was in graduate school in Toronto, I also joined the local UFO group. I think it was called QFORN, the Canadian UFO Research Network. Well, moving back to Philadelphia is when see if I can figure this out here. 1980, I read the Roswell incident. When I read that book, all the other UFO cases, for me, because everybody's interested in different things. Some people are interested in crop circles, cattle mutilations, what am I leaving out here? Abductions, of course, is a big one. But for me, having a background in archaeology and anthropology, I was interested in the nuts and bolts type UFO sightings, something that's like a structured craft. And here was the first crash book that I ever came across. In fact, I think it was in the history of UFOdom, it's the second crash book ever that came along. Does anybody recall what the first one was? Wow. It was Behind the Flying Saucers by Frank Scully in 1950, which got roundly criticized and debunked. And when that happened, the whole notion of crash saucers sort of disappeared from UFO studies and articles and books and things like that until the Roswell incident came along. And when I read this book, I was blown away. I was blown away. It was based on, as Stan Friedman told me, it was based on interviews of 60 people. 60 people, then they went to print with the book. So rather than having an explosion of crashed saucer investigations, the book sort of it had its little moment and that was it. Well, in the late 1980s, I became aware that two fellas were reopening the Roswell case. The fellow on the left, who looks like he's passing a kidney stone, is Kevin Randall. And the fellow on the right is Don Schmitt. Now, they wrote two books which I believe really opened the notion of crash saucers that really gained popularity. In 1991, the same year that I became an active investigator in the Roswell case, they wrote UFO Crash at Roswell. Sold like 500,000 copies, and terrific book. Now, this picture was taken, I think, 3 years ago at a conference that the two found themselves together on. They split up in 1995. They had a falling out. They had to split up, and this was the first meeting between the two. Somebody wanted a picture. Someone said, hey, Don and Kevin, can I get you two together? It'll be something, first time in how many years? Oh, sure. And Kevin looks something less than optimistic here. But they did, and there it is. In 1991, I teamed up with Schmitt and Randall looking for the alleged archaeologist who was said in the original story to have discovered the craft and the bodies in New Mexico in 1947. Again, I use the term allegedly. they were from the University of Pennsylvania here in Philadelphia. So I called up Kevin. He had passed his kidney stone. And I said, what have you done about the archaeologists? And he said, well, we had a name or two, but we hit a dead end. And so that was it. I said, do you mind if I take a crack at it? Since they were from the University of Pennsylvania, I can go down there today and look around. And that's what I did. That's how I got involved in the active investigation, was looking for the archaeologists. And I interviewed several of the archaeologists on Penn's staff. They all denied it, of course, but one of them, I'm convinced today, was actually there at the crash scene. I've got several sources who put him there. When I interviewed him, he knew all about the Roswell crash, but told me, well, you know what it was? And I said, oh boy, here it comes. He's really going to give me the lowdown on this. He says, well, it was a V-2 rocket with a chimpanzee at the controls. And I said, oh. I said, Doctor, I'm just sorry, with all due respect, I don't believe you. And that was the end of the interview. And his name is John Cotter, Professor Emeritus. He's dead now. He died about 2005. But he was best known for doing the work on the Clovis site. It's the ancient Paleo-Indian site in Clovis, New Mexico. And he was there, I'm convinced. And that's how I got involved. Today, of course, I'm involved in all aspects of the Roswell case, not just the archaeologists. Starting in 1998, Don Schmidt and I hooked up as a team because we wanted to continue a proactive investigation of the case. Now, some of you will remember that in 1997, you had the 50th anniversary of the Roswell incident. And by that time, the case was big news. CNN had reporters down here. One of the, I don't know which station it was, had gavel-to-gavel coverage of on July the 4th of the goings-on at Roswell, the festival and what have you. And unfortunately, after the festival was over and everybody went home, most of the investigators left the field. That was it. They figured, well, that's it for Roswell. There's nothing left to investigate. Let's all go home. Well, both Don Schmidt and I were board members at the Center for UFO Studies in Chicago. And he came down from Wisconsin for our meeting, and he gave an update on what he was doing still on the Roswell case. And I gave an update on what I was doing. And Don said, well, you know, I'm going to Roswell next month. This would be May of 1998. Does anybody want to come with me? And one fellow put his hand up, another board member, he said, it's 50-50. Well, you know yourself. When someone asks you, are you going to do this, and you say it's 50-50, you know it's no, right? It's no. So I said, I'll go with you, Don. So Don and I, we took our first trip to Roswell as a team in May of 1998, and we're still a team. This is, I think, 15 years later. You know, in this business, that's a long time. This picture was taken in 2006. We were doing a TV show for the Sci-Fi Channel called Sci-Fi Investigates. And I think I was asking him where the portable, well, where they were. or else he's really telling me where to go. Okay, the Roswell case. But that was supposed to let you know that we're still a team. And, you know, we've had our differences, but nothing that would cause a schism. And so we're still at it. In 1947, as everybody knows, the UFO phenomenon hit us like a bolt out of the blue in June of that year. Here are some of the headlines in the national newspapers from that period. You can see it's front page news, flying saucer mystery grows, flying disc seen in different areas. Front page news, not like today where the mainstream media won't cover UFOs anymore. But back in 1947, it was news. The publishers of the newspapers didn't like it. They don't like the paranormal. They just don't like it. And nation intrigued, puzzled by flying disc reports. Well, 2 weeks after these initial headlines broke, this one hit. Now, this is the Roswell Daily Record for July the 8th, 1947. The Daily Record was an afternoon newspaper, just like the Philadelphia Bulletin used to be in Philadelphia. The Inquirer was a morning paper, the Bulletin was an afternoon paper. RAAF, that's not the Royal Air Force, it's the Roswell Army Airfield, captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. Wow, what is this? It hit the local newspapers. The story went out over the wire, the AP, the Associated Press, and the United Press, and the story was in the stream of commerce for news gathering. So the thing was that the rancher, Mac Brazel, who had discovered the wreckage on the morning of July the 3rd, 1947, he didn't get into town, into Roswell, until Sunday, July the 6th, because it was in a remote region in central New Mexico. And they didn't have, he had no radio, they had a weekly newspaper there, so someone, one of his relatives said, well, Mac, I think what that is, I think that's, you've got parts of a flying saucer on your ranch. And so they talked him into making the 75-mile drive to Roswell with a couple boxes of the wreckage. So he comes into Roswell and he goes to the sheriff's office. And the sheriff doesn't believe him. He says he thinks this guy's crazy. So just, he says, anything in the air that comes from the air, that's the provenance of the Air Force. So you really should go to the air base, which is south of town, Roswell Army Airfield. Well, just then the telephone rings. It's a reporter from the local radio station, KGFL. Now, this is a farming town, and so what this reporter, he has a normal routine where he makes several phone calls to find out if anything's going on that he could put on the radio. So he calls the sheriff, hey, Sheriff, you got anything that I can put on, any news that I can put on the air for my show? And he says, I have just the guy for you. He's right here now. So he puts Mac Brazel on the phone to Frank Joyce in KGFL, tells him the whole story of this. He thinks he's found parts of one of them flying saucer things. So Frank Joyce doesn't believe him either. But nevertheless, he's got the story. The story is in the media. KGFL has a direct wire to the United Press International, and Frank Joyce passes this along to UPI. So that very afternoon, later that same day, there's a General Roger Ramey in Fort Worth, whose 8th Air Force Command was the headquarters to which the 509th Bomb Group in Roswell reported. He held a press conference. He had some of the personnel in Roswell bring a couple of boxes of that stuff so he could see for himself. And they substituted this, we get this from Jesse Marcel, that they substituted a weather balloon for it. So you have this headline from the previous day saying they captured a flying saucer. Why put out a headline? If you want to kill the story, why put out a headline that you captured one? I'll get into that in a moment. But General Ramey's job was to kill the story. It was to kill the story. So they hooked up this weather balloon. Oh, it wasn't a flying saucer, it was a weather balloon. General Ramey empties Roswell saucer. July 9, 1947. Most papers in the United States, see, the Air Force was slick. They didn't put out the first press release about the flying saucer until around noontime, knowing that all the morning papers had missed the story, but only a few of the afternoon papers might carry it. Well, outside of the Roswell Daily Record, the only newspaper to carry the flying saucer crash story was the San Francisco Chronicle. All the others waited till the next day to carry both Army finds flying saucer, flying disc turns up just as hot air. It's a weather balloon. That's what most papers in the country carried. No story here. Roswell was a 2-day story because of this. Now, what does Demi Moore, who was born in Roswell, by the way, and Patrick Swayze, the late Patrick Swayze, this is the movie Ghost. Now, why am I talking about that? Well, have you ever heard of the theatrical technique of suspension of disbelief? Okay. In the old days, before they had technology, they would, to portray a ghost, you would just have another character, you know, I'm a ghost, you know, just carry on like he was a real person. But in the audience, you're saying, well, I can see him. Why can't Demi Moore see him? Well, you have to suspend disbelief to make the story continue. You know she can see him, but for the story's sake, you have to pretend that she can't see him. That's suspension of disbelief. Now, besides ghosts, the Babe Ruth story, William Bendix, 1948. Can anybody tell me what the suspension of disbelief there was? William Bendix played Babe Ruth because he looked somewhat like him. And the Babe was a left-handed batter and a left-handed thrower. And in the movie, William Bendix looks really awkward trying to throw the baseball and trying to swing the bat to hit these gigantic home runs. The problem was, William Bendix was right-handed. So he was really challenged to play the part because he couldn't throw and he couldn't swing the bat like the Babe did. Unfortunately, Babe Ruth died during the production of the movie. This was more than likely the last photograph of him. But when the movie came out, it was a big hit. They overlooked William Bendix's shortcomings as a baseball player because they had such adoration for the Babe, and he had just died. So out of respect, they just overlooked William Bendix's performance as the Babe in the movie. So they suspended disbelief that William Bendix was Babe Ruth out of respect for the Babe. Now I have just one more example, perhaps one of the most egregious examples of miscasting was Anthony Perkins as Jimmy Pearsall, the Boston Red Sox center fielder. Does anybody remember Jimmy Pearsall? Yes, we have a couple, thank you. Pearsall was an all-star center fielder for the Boston Red Sox. So why are they making a movie out of him? I mean, he was an all-star, but he wasn't Babe Ruth. Well, they got Anthony Perkins to play Jimmy Pearsall, the center fielder. Jimmy Pearsall was right-handed, so was Anthony Perkins. The problem was, when Anthony Perkins threw the baseball, now remember he's an all-star, when he threw the baseball in the movie, he went like this. And when he swung the bat, he swung like that. Oh my God, how can we get, you know, how can this happen? How can they suspend disbelief that Perkins was ever an athlete or ever could be or even play an athlete? Well, the reason was they suspended disbelief in this case was because the movie was not about baseball, it was about mental illness. So they suspended disbelief out of respect for the mentally ill. So the story was about, he had an overbearing father, Carl Malden played that, and everybody was rooting for him because his father was so overbearing, and it was about mental illness. So they did suspend disbelief. So what does that have to do with Roswell? Anybody with a brain, even a 6-year-old, can identify, maybe a 6-year-old can't identify what that is, but they can identify, oh, that's a rubber, that's rubber right there, if I can figure this out. That's rubber, and that's tin foil. And those are balsa wood sticks. They can identify that. They might not know that that's a radar target and that's a decaying weather balloon, but a 6-year-old can identify that. Do you mean to tell me that the men of the 509th Bomb Group, now the 509th Bomb Group was the group, it was created during World War II for one purpose and one purpose only. Does anybody know who that is? That's Paul Tibbets, dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The 509th was created for one reason alone, is to deliver the atomic bomb to an enemy. And here we have, this is Operation Crossroads in 1946. Unfortunately, they missed the target, but you can still see the atomic cloud. That's what the 509th was for. It was our best outfit. This was not some minor league outfit. This was the only atomic group anywhere in the world that had atomic weapons. Now, if you can't tell an interplanetary spaceship from rubber, from balsa wood, from tinfoil, do you want their fingers on the atomic trigger? I don't think so. But that's what the General Ramey wanted the rest of the country to believe. These guys, they couldn't tell the difference. Well, if they had used, instead of the weather balloon, if they had used something like it was one of our latest experimental aircraft, we wouldn't be here today because that story would have been believed. But they went so far as to this weather balloon explanation that nobody, with half a brain believed it. But the press wanted to be out of that story, and so they, oh yeah, that must be it. Now, the story died for 30 years because the first thing they did was you got to kill it in the press. So they were successful in killing the story in the press, which was the main target when the story broke. Now I bring this up here. If I go back one here, whoop. You see General Ramey here. He's just come in from the outside. He still has his, well, he doesn't have his sunglasses, but you can see him holding this memo here, this telex, something written there. Well, little did General Ramey know, I'm sure he didn't know that he was being photographed holding it face up. But back in 1947, you couldn't, this picture was taken from 15 feet away. There's a flash involved. Who's going to read that? Well, today, with the aid of photographic software, we have been able to piece parts of this letter memo together. I know myself, when I first looked at it, and I have they're not here, but a couple, this is when I used to have the MUFON meetings. I put it into my computer and I asked a couple of my MUFON friends to look at this with me. So within 10 seconds, I had no idea what this was going to say, other than it had to do with some Air Force matter, right? Certainly not the Navy, and had to do with the Air Force. So within 10 seconds, I was able to read, "The victims of the wreck you forwarded to the thumb at Fort Worth, Texas." Right there, that kills the weather balloon story. It kills the weather balloon story. We know this is about Roswell, what happened at Roswell, because this word right here is DISK, D-I-S-K, DISK. So they're not talking about a battleship. The victims of the wreck you forwarded to the blah blah at Fort Worth, Texas. This memo was dated July the 8th. The bodies were found, the Roswell bodies, there were 3 crash locations in the Roswell case. The bodies were found at one location. Mac Brazel found a lot of wreckage at another location. So they're talking about the wreckage that was forwarded to Fort Worth the day before, and we know that is what took place. The memo is alerting, it's about the victims, the little bodies. And in military jargon, you don't refer to the deceased as victims. What do you refer to them as? Casualties. Casualties. So these are not casualties, these are victims. And weather balloons don't have victims. Even if one lands on your head, you're not a victim. The other thing is that it mentions here, it says, weather balloons would make blah, 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 land cruise. Land cruise. Well, we know what that is, because in the following days, they had weather balloon demonstrations. This one was from the Fort Worth Star Telegram evening of July 11th. They did these weather balloon, to follow up on the press conference, they did these weather balloon demonstrations all over the country. And you can see down here, there's a, whoops. No flying disc. No flying disc. And here's the Alamogordo News of July the 10th, I believe it is. You can see the demonstration. They're not only trying to kill Roswell, they're trying to kill all flying saucer reports that were going on at the time. Fantasy of flying disc is explained here. They were only too eager to accept that weather balloon explanation. Not only Roswell, but all flying discs are weather balloons. General Ramey went on the radio in El Paso, and he was asked, well, General, where have these flying discs been reported? Well, they've been reported in every state except Kansas. Oh, really, really? Yes, and you know what Kansas is, it's a dry state. The implication was, not only was it weather balloons, but you had to be a drunk to report flying discs. And it worked. The press dropped the story of not only Roswell, but flying saucers for a long time. Now, what all this was about was the three sites that I was telling you about was the Mac Brazel debris field site where all this little pieces of wreckage had come to the ground. That's where Jesse Marcel, Sr., the base intelligence officer at the Roswell Army Airfield, which is just south of Roswell. It was a SAC base. Our country's first SAC base had B-29s there. The wreckage was found here. The craft exploded near Corona, we think during a thunder and lightning storm, or else it was an internal explosion, just blew apart. 2 or 3 bodies at the time of the explosion were expelled and came to rest on a small bluff 2.5 miles east of the Brazel debris field site. The rest of the craft, which was an inner cabin that withstood the explosion, or an escape pod, it was egg-shaped, came to rest another 30 miles east-southeast of the debris field, much closer to Roswell, right up Route 285, just off Route 285. That's where this escape pod or inner cabin came to rest. That's where they found 3 more bodies and one that was still alive and walking around. That's where the live one was found. 3 sites. What these newspaper releases were designed to do, the first one, that they had found a crashed flying saucer and had recovered it and were taking it to higher headquarters. They never mentioned bodies. The bodies that they had found, they already knew about the bodies, were found right here. Jesse Marcel was still up at this site when the bodies were found. They were found right there. They were diverting attention away from this site, away from the body site to this site, and talking only about wreckage. The press release made it sound like they had recovered a little doodle bug or some sort of gadget. They never said it was an interplanetary craft. So they first diverted attention away. They had to put a story out because the story was already out in the press. It was on the press wires. They had to put something out. So they put out this well, we found something, folks. And I mean, they were expert at this. And so the next press release was, oh my goodness, it wasn't a flying saucer. It was a weather balloon. So making everybody feel stupid. Oh my goodness. How could I ever think it was a flying saucer? It's a weather balloon. Oh my gosh. I'm through with flying saucers. It's all hokum. Well, the press bought that, end of story, for the next 30 years. What they had to do then, they got it killed in the press. Their own personnel, the Air Force own personnel, the military, the ones who were at the site, they knew. What do you do with them? Well, they were the easiest to control. Well, actually, the press was easier, but the military fellows were threatened with incarceration in Leavenworth if they wanted to learn more about this and even talk about it. They held big meetings in hangars. Fellas, if you want to learn more about what happened here, you can read all about it in Leavenworth. So that took care of the military. But in some cases, especially those who knew about the bodies, needed a little extra, I won't say cajoling because it wasn't cajoling, they needed a little extra impetus to remain silent. In this case, this picture was taken in the year 2000 by, the fellow's name is Frederick Benthall. He was a photographer with the Army Air Corps, but he was stationed at Anacostia Naval Air Station in Washington, D.C. He was called out to Roswell when the wreckage was discovered, especially the bodies. They flew him out there, and they gave him a camera. They took him out to the crash site where they had the bodies stored in a tent. And it was a rubberized tent. It was very dark in there, and he was told to aim his camera down. And when told to take a picture, take the picture, but don't look at what you're taking the picture of. Well, it took them a good hour to photograph all the bodies. I mean, they were in a circle and they had them go around a couple times. But in that time, he got a look at them. And when the job was done, they flew him back there. They drove him back to Roswell. But they confiscated his camera. Of course, I mean, go on your way, no, not with a camera. And they flew him back to Washington. He's debriefed by his commanding officer, who was a colonel. And the colonel says, Sergeant Benthall, come in here. Do you know what you photographed out there in Roswell? Yes, sir. Let me ask that question again. Sergeant Benthall, do you know what you photographed out there in Roswell? Yes, sir. Sergeant Benthall, I'm only going to ask you one more time. Do you know what you photographed out there in Roswell? No, sir. Dismissed. Well, the colonel wasn't quite fully confident that Benthall had really forgotten what he had photographed. So shortly thereafter, he was shipped out. And here he is down here. He was shipped out to the Antarctic to photograph, this is for the rest of his hitch in the Army Air Corps, to photograph the effects of cold upon military equipment. And that's what they did with him to reinforce that he should never talk about this. Well, fortunately, he did talk to us in the year 2000. I think he was identified in Stan Friedman's book, Crash at Corona, as they just gave his initials, but we found him. The citizens, now the military, you saw how they were dealt with. The citizens of Roswell and Corona who actually saw the crash and especially saw the bodies were dealt with really harshly. Now, you know yourself, the military has no direct authority over civilians. only in time of war and in time of extreme emergency when martial law is invoked. Well, what to do about the civilians? Because in these outlying areas, when there's a plane crash, and they would have occasional plane crashes, it was always the civilians that got there first before the military ever got there, and such was this case. The civilians got there first, saw everything. Whoa, what to do about them? They know this weather balloon thing is just a big lie. Well, enter the sheriff of Chavez County, where Roswell is the county seat, George Wilcox. And there you see George, Sheriff Wilcox. This is from the July 9, 1947 Roswell Daily Record front page. He's taking phone calls from people all over the world calling, what's going on, what's going on? If you call the base, they say, well, you call the sheriff in town, and they call the sheriff. I can't tell you anything. I don't know. I'm helping the boys out. I don't know what happened. Well, they got Wilcox to go around to mostly the Hispanic community in Roswell, who had seen the bodies, some of them, to deliver the message. And in one case, we have a direct testimony from the people who were involved. They said, oh, we were at home, we saw the sheriff's car pull up. We said, oh, here comes Sheriff Wilcox. Wonder what he wants. Hey, Sheriff, how you doing? Well, he was there to tell him, I'm going to kill you, or someone's going to kill you if you ever talk about what you saw. And they're not only going to kill you, they're going to kill your children. So this was the message that Wilcox was delivering. And we always wondered, because his family told us that Roswell destroyed George Wilcox. Just Roswell destroyed him. How's that possible? Well, now we know, because they forced him to deliver this awful message to eyewitnesses to the Roswell crash. You better keep quiet, or else you're going to be killed and your children are going to be killed. Well, of course they kept quiet. And just for good measure, they brought in the hammer. He was at Roswell Army Airfield. His name was Arthur Philbin. He was a former New York City policeman, 6'4", big shoulders. In cases where Wilcox said, I can't do it. I can't tell that fellow we're going to kill him because I know him. They would send this guy over, Philbin, and he would deliver. He would take his baton. He would pound his baton in his hand. You're going to keep quiet, or else you're going to wind up dead. And your children too. They would take the children into one room, say, we're going to kill your parents. They would take the parents into another room, we're going to kill your children. What are you going to do? Back in those days, the military had a lot of prestige. We had just won World War II. It was generally believed, when the military spoke, it must be the truth. Not so today, but back then it was. So Philbin was what would you call him, not the hangman, but the heavy. He was the heavy. He was the ultimate weapon. So that's why the people didn't, you got the press killed, you got the military killed, now you got the civilians killed, you're home free. Well, skipping ahead to the 90s, the General Accounting Office, at the urging of some of its citizens in New Mexico by way of their congressman, Stephen Schiff, wanted to find out not what the Roswell case was, but what documents relate to the Roswell case that were created at the time, and have they been properly stored and classified? And they figured, well, if we get some documentation as to what was, being transmitted over the teletypes, this may go a long way to telling us what really happened. And well, surprise, surprise, the GAO, which I think is now called the Government Accountability Office, but back then it was the General Accounting Office, the investigative arm of Congress, they couldn't find any documents. And what they did learn was that all the documents covering the period of the Roswell incident, basically 1947, 48, 49, were destroyed without known authority. Now, you know yourself, if you've been in the military, everything, you have to have an authority. You need an authority to go to the bathroom. There's a regulation that covers it. Well, here you have documents destroyed without no known, or with no known authority. They couldn't determine who gave the order, when it happened, but all the documents relating to Roswell, going in and coming out of the Roswell airfield, Washington and Fort Worth were destroyed. At the same time, the Air Force took it upon itself, well, we're going to go the GAO one better. We're going to reopen the Roswell case. We're going to reinvestigate it and see what happened. I mean, you know, don't they already know? But they reopened it in the early 90s in conjunction with the Government General Accounting Office. And they came out with this report, fact versus, the Roswell report, fact versus fiction in the New Mexico desert. Their conclusion was actually something that several UFO investigators had come up with, I will say some anti-Roswell investigators. Both of them are dead now, unfortunately, that this Project Mogul was the answer for Roswell. A series of weather balloons and radar targets. That's what you see there, a bunch of radar targets. It was a top secret project designed to take acoustic listening devices into the high atmosphere to listen into what they expected to be the first Soviet atomic bomb test. Now this is like 1947. The Soviets didn't explode their first atom bomb until 1949, 2 years later, but nevertheless, this was the technique that we had hoped to discover it with, was this Project Mogul. The problem with Project Mogul, and the Air Force, the problem with Project Mogul is that while the project was top secret, the radar reflectors and the balloons were not. They're the same exact radar targets and weather balloons that were in the original 1947 weather balloon story. But the Air Force admitted, said we did lie in 1947. We did lie in 47. It wasn't a weather balloon. It was a bunch of weather balloons. The way I see it, it's still tinfoil, rubber, and balsa wood sticks that any 6-year-old can still identify. But the press bought it. Wreckage of a spaceship of this Earth and US. There you go. Front page. Hook, line, and sinker. Hook, line, and sinker. Again, this is that's Sunday, September 18th or something like that, 1994. See, by this time, we've already had Vietnam and a couple other military actions, and the press doesn't believe anything the military says about anything except this. They believe them about this. And it all has to do with they still don't like the paranormal, and that's a whole nother story why they don't like it, but they don't. And so they wanted this story over. We don't want any more UFO stories, especially Roswell. Hook, line, and sinker. Well, the fact versus fiction report didn't have anything, never mentioned the bodies that were allegedly recovered. You know, you had the descriptions, 3.5 to 4 feet tall, big head, no nose, no ears, little slit for mouth, little spindly body. Bill Burns described last night as squiggly. So, in 1997, the year of the 50th anniversary, and I think to rain on their parade, the Air Force came out with the Roswell report, case closed, meaning they had identified and put to rest the stories about the little bodies. They said that the people who reported seeing little bodies were actually seeing this. This is a photograph from Project High Dive, which took place in the 1950s, where they were testing high altitude parachute drops. And they didn't want to use live humans because they didn't know what was going to happen. And what usually happened was when these parachutes came down from like 100,000 feet with these mannequins, the mannequins would all break apart. They would just break apart. But does that to you look like a 3.5 foot tall little alien with a big head? No. And they were described as having tight form-fitting little silvery suits. To me, that looks like a dime store mannequin in a flight suit with a harness to be dropped from on high. And we call this explanation the dummies from above explanation. Well, this fellow retired as Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Madsen. We interviewed him since this, he's elderly now, but he was on the Larry King Show with us in 2009. And he said that when the Air Force, in the person of Captain McAndrew, I forget his first name, James McAndrew, came to interview him about Project Mogul and Project High Dive, he told McAndrew, he said, there's no way that these mannequins could explain what people were reporting. And he said, McAndrew just did not want to hear that. He just did not want to hear that. And when he started talking that way, McAndrew put his pencil down and didn't take any notes about it because he was trying to convince them that this is what the people at Roswell had reported. Well, how can it have also been that, besides they don't look like them? Because Roswell happened in 1947. This program did not start until the 1950s. Well, they had a new explanation for that. It's an affliction called time compression, which only seems to affect pro-Roswell witnesses. Anti-Roswell witnesses, they're not affected by it. But pro-Roswell witnesses, according to the Air Force, who reported bodies, actually were seeing this. But as you age, according to this theory, your brain tends to compress time. So if you see something in the 1950s, your brain is telling you it was the 1940s. Time compression. Well, this was too much even for the press, because when the Air Force held the press conference to come out with that, the Colonel Haynes, I think his name was he was just laughed off the podium. He said, all right, that's it. I'm not going to take any more questions. I'm out of here, because that was just too much even for the press. But if you call the Air Force today and say, what is your position on Roswell? It's Project Mogul and this. And they will not, I predict they will never, ever address Roswell again. They're running out the clock, and they're pretty close to having all of the first-hand witnesses pass away. We're close to it, and they're just running out the clock. Peter Jennings reporting. We had the Peter Jennings crew down in Roswell for a week. They were going to do a special on Roswell. We had their crew there for a week. Took them out to the crash sites, showed them where everything happened and what it was, blah, 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 blah. And we could tell, we would say, they're not buying any of this, because they had that little wan smile on their face, And they said, we have a bad feeling about this, because they're not buying this. Well, when the show aired, the first segment, which was about UFOs in general, was pretty fair. It was evenly balanced. So I said, oh boy, and coming up, Roswell. Oh boy, I can't wait for that. Well, the whole Roswell segment was, yes, and this is Peter Jennings, yes, Roswell was a big story, but unfortunately, it was a myth. That was the whole Roswell segment. Roswell is a myth. He never explained why he believed that or what the facts were to support that statement, but that's all he said about Roswell. It was a myth. So he bought the Project Mogul thing too, and he passed away soon thereafter. Carey and Schmidt, however, were on the case. We were on the case. This photo was taken in 2002. There's Don Schmidt, there's yours truly, there's William Dolman, the lead archaeologist from the University of New Mexico, and there's Larry Landsman, executive producer from the Sci-Fi Channel. We conducted an archaeological dig at the Brazel Ranch. That's the first one where all the little pieces came down. We conducted a dig for a week, and the result was this show that Jennifer mentioned in the lead-up, the Roswell Crash Startling New Evidence, a 2-hour special, which they're still showing, by the way. It's 11 years old, that they're still showing it. It was done at this site here, the debris field site, because that's where most of the wreckage was, and it got scattered about. And we thought we had our best chance to find something there. There's the site. I took this picture in 2002. It looks much the same today. Remote New Mexico. The craft itself, the trajectory was this way, and so this whole area was covered with pieces of small wreckage. Pieces of small wreckage. The most interesting thing we found that summer of 2002, we had been told stories that there was a gouge in the ground, in the surface of the desert floor. There was a gouge that wasn't there before. After they removed all of the wreckage, there was this 500-foot gouge. So we brought in a backhoe to dig a trench right across the trajectory of the alleged gouge. And you can see here, you can see almost a perfect V. You see that? That's from what they call, archaeologists call them aeolian deposits, airborne little bits of earth that fill in depressions in the desert floor. And this represents perhaps 50 years or 60 years of aeolian deposits. You can see it's of a different consistency of the rest, and it has this perfect V where the gouge was said to have been. So we think that's an artifact. You know, a balloon certainly couldn't do that. Now, one of the problems with the dig was this is a topographic map of the site. Here's the gouge right here. The whole site itself was about 3/4 of a mile long by several hundred feet wide, and you can see that there was, according to Jesse Marcel and Brazel and others, the whole area was covered. Well, the 2002 dig only dug right here. That's the only place we dug. All the other areas we didn't touch. Now, it's our belief that when the military was there, they concentrated most heavily in this area, so you're not going to find anything. We believe that the wreckage was very light. It could be blown by the wind for however far, maybe into West Texas, you know. So 2 weeks from today, I will be at this site with another archaeological team. We're going to investigate this area out here where we think possibly a piece or two or more could have become lodged, you know, say in a yucca plant or something like that, and had gotten covered over in the years. But we think we have a better chance of actually finding something out here rather than up here. And this thing is, so 2 weeks, we'll be there. That will be our third dig, but only the second real one. Okay, as far as a few witnesses, this fellow, this picture's from the base yearbook in 1947, name is Earl Fulford. And I just happened to call him, this is about 2007, and you call him, you never know what you're going to get. You get the phone slammed down in your ear, people laugh at you. Well, in this one, I got his wife, and she said, "Oh, yes, my husband, yes, he's right here, and he'd love to talk to you." And I thought, oh boy, this is a first, you know. He's never talked to anybody before. He's been called before, but he's never talked. He's had a recent heart attack, and now he wants to talk. Well, he was in the cleanup crew. He described to us how they were taken out into the desert, and they were each given a burlap sack, and were told to pick up anything that wasn't natural and put it in this sack. Well, he described how he would pick up the piece of this memory metal. This metal you could wad up in your hand and hold it over a flat surface, let go, and it'd flatten right out. That's our holy, we call that our holy grail of Roswell, because we're looking for a piece of that, because we still don't have anything with its full qualities. It was indestructible, but yet you could wad it up and it would flatten right out without a crease. Well, he said that when he picked up a piece, he would, he'd throw it into his bag, but what would happen is it would flatten out and it wouldn't go to the bottom. It would stick along the side of this burlap bag. So he said, to get the piece down the bottom, you had to do this to it and reach all the way down and let it go. Otherwise, it would just stick to the side because it was very light, and you know how burlap is. It wants to grab at everything. So Earl was, that was his, so we brought him out in 2009. We brought him out to Roswell. Bill Burns actually took this picture, because Bill was there too. And we brought him back to the site where he, recovered all this metal. And he says, yes, this is it. And I did this, I was over here, and blah, 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 blah. Well, you can see he's, in that photo, he's like 84 years old. And you can compare that with what he looked like back in 1947. And so we had the picture taken at the Brazil site. Well, before we left Roswell, Don Schmidt and I, we visited Earl Fulford's hotel room. We wanted to say goodbye. And his granddaughter answered, because she brought him there. And she said, "Granddad, there's somebody here to see you." And he was in bed, and he turned over to see who it was, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness. I'm thinking, he looks like death warmed over. So I'm thinking, oh my God, what's going on here? And he said goodbye, but in my mind I said, something's not good here. So we said goodbye, and we went home. Well, after Earl got home, he lives in Florida, or he lived in Florida. Bill Burns, he had that UFO hunter show, They flew Earl out to Hollywood or California to film a segment of the UFO hunters. They brought in Jesse Marcel Jr. and they filmed a section where he was supposed to identify among different types of metal, the metal that most resembled what he was picking up, which he did, and Jesse Marcel Jr. did the same thing. Well, after the show, Fulford flies back to Florida. And he immediately, he was put in the hospital. He died less than a week later. And so I was feeling real bad, because I said, oh my God, I killed him. I killed him because we wanted to bring him out to Roswell, and we put him through his paces, and his heart couldn't take it, and he dies. Died of heart failure. So I called his wife. I told her what my problem was. I said, I am so sorry. I feel that I contributed to his passing. She says, no, don't feel that way. She said, he was doing what he liked best when his passing. He was in the hospital watching NASCAR. And the dream of his life was to return to Roswell. That was his final dream, was to return to Roswell. And you fulfilled that dream. And don't ever think that you were the cause of his demise. And so that made me feel a lot better, because I was thinking that, oh boy, what have I done? Another witness, this gentleman is named William Ennis. He worked in the big hangar where all of the crash material came in from the desert. They brought it into this big hangar. And for 10 years, he denied that he knew anything. That's why you need someone on a case like this, that you have to have staying power. Because for 10 years, he said, I don't know anything. I didn't see anything. You're barking up the wrong tree. This picture's from the 1947 yearbook, just like the one of Earl Fulford. Here he is 2 years ago, down at the Roswell Museum. He lived in Roswell. He said, Don and Tom, I don't know how much longer I have, but I want to come clean here. He says, yes, I was in the big hangar when the stuff was brought in, all that wreckage, and he says, I saw it all. And the thing that puzzled me the most was that in all of this wreckage, there was nothing that was a motor, an engine that made, that it was recognizable as a motive force for this vehicle, this flying saucer. He says, I want you fellas to promise me before I die, I want you to promise me you'll find out what made that thing fly, because there wasn't a moving part on it. So thinking, oh geez, how are we going to do that? We said, okay, Bill, we're on it. We're on it. Well, to make a long story short, I was reading some journal articles on this memory metal, because our government tried to re-engineer the memory metal. And they did a lot of laboratory experiments, and I was reading some of the scientific reports of it when I said, oh my God, that's how that thing flew. That was the engine. They were trying to recapitulate the memory metal, but in this journal article, it said when the metal was morphing, when it was changing shape, energy was created. They were able to measure that energy was being created. I said, that's how they did it. I don't know how they did it, but the engine was all that memory metal that was scattered around the hangar floor. And that's what I believe today, that it was the memory metal. I don't know how they did it, but they did it. Unfortunately, when I learned that, Bill had died several weeks before that. So we never did get to fulfill our promise that we would find out what made it fly. So he's gone now about a year. He died last year. Now, most of the Roswell witnesses are gone. They're gone. I would say 90 to 95% are gone.
10 minutes if you're comfortable.
Huh?
5 to 10 minutes if you're okay.
Okay,
Everybody?
yep. Most of the Roswell witnesses are gone now. Certainly all the officers are gone. The only ones that are left, and it's why I show this picture here, are your enlisted ranks. And this year, even this year, we found 2 new witnesses. Let's see here, where is he? This fellow, Gene Niederschmidt. Gene Niederschmidt. We found in April of this year, still alive. He was with the 3rd Photo Unit at Roswell. And the curious thing we learned from him was that, remember I told you the story about Fred Benthal, to photograph the wreckage and the bodies and everything, even though Roswell had their own photo unit, they brought in outside photographers. They didn't allow the 3rd Photo Unit at Roswell near this thing to photograph any of it. So he told us they were not happy about it. They knew something important was going on because they saw all of these strange people on the base with business suits, and they thought, oh, that's the FBI or the whatever, what do they call CIA then, OSS or CIG, something like that. A lot of people they didn't recognize something big was going on, but they were not being allowed to do their work because they normally would photograph every crash that ever happened. And being an air base, there were a number of crashes, and that's why they were there, to photograph crashes. So he said, but there's another fellow I want you to talk to, a friend of his, named Calvin Cox. Calvin Cox. Where is Calvin Cox? Right? Oops. This thing I should have stuck with my own. Calvin Cox, still alive. Still alive. He told the same story as Niederschmidt about, no, we were not involved in taking pictures, and there's somebody else took the pictures, and they looked like they came in from Washington. But he had one additional thing to say about it. He says, I was told by Major Easley I was going to pull a 4-hour shift guarding the perimeter of the hangar where all of the wreckage was brought, and the bodies were initially brought too. He was to stand guard inside the hangar because they had guards around outside. He was to stand guard inside the hangar. They had a roped off area that he was not to go beyond. He was not given a pistol or the M1 rifle. He was given a submachine gun. And his orders were, if anybody tries to get in here that's not authorized, shoot to kill. Shoot to kill. Now, what sort of balloon is that valuable that you have to shoot to kill somebody over it? But that's what he said. He was given orders, shoot to kill. He also said that he could see the wreckage. He described it as being aluminum colored and all sorts of little pieces and some beams and things like that. He didn't get close to it because he had to stay within his limits. But those were his orders, shoot to kill. Fortunately, he didn't have to. Now, without Major Jesse Marcel, there's no Roswell story to report. He's dying of emphysema in 1978. He mentioned it on his ham radio network. He was the base intelligence officer at Roswell, first military person at the crash site. And he's flown to Fort Worth, Texas, where they staged this press conference to debunk the flying saucer report. And you can see the look on his face. He's like, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? What am I supposed to hold this? And they made him the fall guy. He was the fall guy for Roswell. He misidentified, never mind that he knew every balloon in the inventory and that he had a weather course describing how they were used and what types of balloons. He knew all of that, but he was not able to identify a weather balloon. They would have us believe. And you can see the substituted radar target. This is just off the shelf, ripped up, and he's holding it for the press conference. And he died in 1986. His son, Jesse Jr., I was with 3 months ago down in Roswell. During the festival, you know, they have a parade down Main Street, and they put all the speakers in the back of a lowboy. For some reason, they put bales of hay in the back for us to sit on. So I shared a bale of hay with Jesse Jr. And we're both saying to one another, what are we doing here? And I thought he looked fine. He was a nice man, nice as you'd ever want to meet. He's a ear, nose, and throat doctor, helicopter pilot, was deployed to Iraq in his 70s. And he died 2 months ago. What news that was. It was just unexpected. He looked, like I said, he looked fine. Now, to give you some idea, Jesse Jr. is the son of the participant. Although Jesse did see, he did handle this I-beam that had symbols on it, strange symbols. The Air Force tried to get him to recant that. He says, how can I recant that? That's what happened. And Jesse is somebody who, I've known him for a long time. He can't tell a lie. He's that type of person. And when he died, now remember now, he's junior. He was 77 years old. This is junior now. Now, it gives you some idea how far the case has gone. The children are now dying off from the actual participants. So I just wanted to pay a little tribute to Jesse Jr., and there it was. Real quick, the book we just published, Inside the Real Area 51. Why did we do this book? Well, all of the Roswell books leave off where the material and the bodies are delivered to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So it's Inside the Real Area 51, the secret history of Wright-Patterson. It picks up where the material is brought into Wright-Patterson. We talk about Wright-Patterson. One of the things, the Area 51 that you know is in Nevada, of course. Whoops. And it's part of the Nevada, the Atomic Energy Nevada test site where they used to test atomic bombs. There's Groom Lake, and you see some of the facilities down here. It was created to develop the spy planes, the U-2. Remember Francis Gary Powers crashed in 1960? The SR-71 Blackbird was developed there. But most people remember Area 51, not for that, but for this fellow, Robert Lazar, who in the late 1980s said, oh yeah, I worked at Area 51. I worked on foreign technology. Oh, well, yeah, no, off the planet. He said he worked on flying saucers. He was a technician. And there you see his sport model, his famous sport model, which I understand you can get as a plastic in a plastic kit. And, but that's what this is when Area 51 became a household word, is when they started connecting it to foreign, really foreign technology. It all started, however, we know, at Wright-Patterson. They're the Wright brothers. World War I, they created their airstrip in the early 1900s. It was taken over in World War I by the military. And you have, I don't know if this is the right side or the Patterson side, but the other part is up here. Twin airstrips. It's where all of there was our first, they did a lot of development. This was supposed to be our first strategic bomber. Our first, like the B-52. But they say that this one, it couldn't get over the Appalachian Mountains. It couldn't get over, so they canceled the project. But that was our first strategic bomber. Pretty slick, huh? During World War II, in Hangar 23, they brought in Axis aircraft. This is an ME-109 Messerschmitt, and they brought in Japanese Zeros and what have you to see what made them tick, the back engineer, try to defeat them in battle. So they were already set up for re-engineering, and when the Roswell crash happened, it was the best place to go. It wasn't until the early 70s that Wright-Patterson they're starting to get stories of, well, they've got some really foreign stuff there. They got some really foreign stuff there. It's in a place called Hangar 18. Well, 1980, they have a movie about Hangar 18. It really cements the notion of this Hangar 18 with flying saucers and bodies at Wright-Patterson. It was put out by a fellow in Florida named Professor Robert Spencer Carr. We won't get into him, but that's where it started. There is no Hangar 18. There is no Hangar 18 at Wright-Patterson. It's Building 18. It's Building 18, and there it is. You go to Wright-Patterson today, they'll say, tell me where Hangar 18 is. Oh, there's no Hangar 18 here, you dope. It's never was a Hangar 18, and that's all they'll tell you. But what they won't tell you is that they know what you're asking about. They know you're asking about where were the aliens stored. Well, here it is. It's Building 18 and Hangar 23. They're side by side. They're connected to one another. The two of them, they're in this complex. The Hangar 18, they're saying it myself. Building 18 complex. There's Building 18. There's Hangar 23. Hangar 18F is where the bodies were stored for a while because it was a cold storage facility. So that's where it all went. And I'm almost done here. There's what they look like. I won't tell you how I know. We have a chapter called The Jawbone That Spoke Martian. And it's a nice chapter.
This is in your new book.
This is in our new book. It's in our new book. We talk about Barry Goldwater in the Blue Room. A famous story. We go into that. We tell you how that all came about. A lot about J. Allen Hynek. Don Schmitt was a personal disciple of Allen Hynek. And he had a lot of information about Hynek that's never been out before. His relationship to Project Blue Book. And finally, the movie that we're trying to get produced, it was announced 3 years ago down in Roswell that we were going to have this movie. Well, that's 3 years ago. Well, it turns out it's a long story, and if any of you ever had dealings with Hollywood and the movie business, you can't really count on the timetables. We had Sony wanted to do the movie, but the company that has the option on our book says, no, we don't want a big company like that. We want to keep control of it. They say, because if you give it to a big company like Sony, they could make a cartoon out of it, and you have no control over it. So anyway, Don Schmidt, my co-author, is flying to Los Angeles tomorrow to give a talk, a presentation. Hopefully it will bear fruit this time, but we're still trying to get the movie produced. We're working on a mini-series, 4-part, 2 hours each, mini-series about Roswell, based on our book, Witness to Roswell, just different chapters in the book. And I know I'm leaving something out, but if any of you were here last night, there's another issue I'm not going to get into, but we have another initiative that so far looks pretty good, and hopefully at the end of the day, we will have something more than just witness testimony. So I thank you. I think I'm done now. Thank you.